Thanks so much for joining this episode of the Compassionate and Beneficial Living podcast. Please follow, subscribe, share your comments, share with others, and let us know what topics you'd like to hear covered next. In this episode, Emilia Ward, head lacrosse coach at Central Michigan University, joins for a discussion on coaching and mentoring individuals and teams, parallels between coaching, parenting, managing, and leading in many spheres, athletic journeys as adults, the role of nutrition in sports, staying motivated, adapting approaches, supporting athletes on and off the field, nutritional needs of athletes, including athletes with celiac disease, vegetarian and vegan athletes, injury recovery, staying present, thinking bigger than oneself, self-care, bonding with others, advocating for causes through music, and more. In this conversation, I share personal experiences with athletic injuries, challenges with overwork and maintaining boundaries, navigating nutrition choices as a vegan and plant-based athlete, and more. Hello, and thanks so much for joining. I'm Erin McCann. I'm the founder and CEO of C+B, Compassionate and Beneficial Living, and I'm very excited that Emilia Ward, head lacrosse coach at Central Michigan University, is joining us today. Welcome, Emilia. I'm so impressed with the breadth of your athletic, coaching, and leadership accomplishments and your advocacy and musical talents. To start off, tell us a bit about your journey and what you're most excited about for this year.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on. I think so. My journey is definitely, it's an interesting one. I've spent the last 16 years now since graduating after playing Division I athletics, coaching in the NCAA level between Division I, Division II, Division III. And so seeing so many things through my career and have had the opportunity to just be around such great young women throughout that time frame who've, I think, helped shaped me throughout my coaching career and helped me evolve in that realm, but also to be with girls at such an influential time in their life and such an impactful time in their life is really the main reason why I continue to do it and stick with it. But I think having the opportunity to be at the collegiate level and just have that influence, but also have that experience of being able to stay in that competitive light of when I was an athlete on a daily basis, it keeps things interesting, and excited to see where kind of this evolution takes me here at Central Michigan.
Wonderful. I love the idea that you're reflecting on how those that you coach shape you as much as you help to shape them. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think just you get the opportunity, and especially I've been at such different institutions in terms of size of school, locations, but even the type of student that school attracts and what their goals are going on after college. But I think for me, that's always what has shaped so much of it is you get some girls that, yeah, their time here is main reason why maybe they picked the school was the lacrosse program. But very often with our student athletes and the girls I've had the opportunity to coach, it's very often that the school is attractive to them because of what it can do for them later in life. At Kalamazoo, we had a lot of girls who wanted to go on to advocacy work or to law school or working in local governments and that aspect of things. So I think their goals were very different than a lot of girls that I've had who want to go on med school and exercise science school. In that aspect, just what shapes them, what drives them every day helps you as a coach to stay motivated and wanting to do what's best for them on a daily basis.
Absolutely. It's fantastic to hear the breadth of interest areas. And I'd love to talk more about how you take steps through your approaches to support those that you coach, both academically and athletically. On a related note, when I think about your role as coach, I see your experiences as insightful to anyone that's coaching others through a variety of different roles. So certainly including athletes and those that are at these stages of exploring their pathways and areas of focus for their careers, and also parents and supervisors and others in leadership positions. What have been some of your biggest learnings in terms of transitioning from, as you mentioned, an athlete yourself to a team member to an athlete and coach? And what advice would you give a former version of yourself looking back on what you've learned over these past several years?
Yeah, I think the big piece of transitioning from that athlete role to first an assistant coach and then to that head coach or in a company, that kind of CEO role of needing to manage a staff underneath you as well as the players is, I think, just learning through the years of how to work with different personalities and what different people need. When you're an athlete, you're like, okay, what I need is what I need. And that's gonna be what works. And you get into coaching as a young assistant, you're very often really that relationship piece a lot more with your players because you're generally closer in age to them. So I think early in my career, I was able to really learn how to be with different personalities and engage with them on that level and help them learn through that. And then I transitioned into being a very young head coach. I was 23 when I got my first head coaching job. I think my biggest lesson, and I'm still learning every day, is how managing a staff. I think the player side of things is almost easier. I think managing a staff and working with the staff, where as a coach, you generally are a very type A personality and want things done a certain way, and being able to be okay that somebody else might do it just a little differently, but it's still going to get done. And throughout my career has always been, I think, the hardest piece of I'm just always willing, oh, I'll just do it. It's okay. It's easier for me to do it than explain it to you. So just having that patience level as well with people working underneath me on a daily basis, and everybody's working towards the same goal, but just might look a little different.
I can relate in terms of that tendency to choose to do things myself as well. Would love to hear in both contexts, how have you learned to adapt your approach? So you mentioned, for instance, with players, that the relationship piece is key and that athletes may have strong opinions on what works for them. Can you walk through some ways that you tend to think about getting to know the
Yeah.
personality, adapting your approach as needed, and essentially what difference that makes?
Yeah, I think that is the fun part of coaching, is you're always changing. So because every single year it's a different group of kids. You're always going to have a new group that comes in and a group that's graduating out. So you always have that ability to evolve and recreate the script for at least that group of kids who, and even for the group before, the year before, asking them, okay, what did you guys like? What didn't you guys like? What was effective? And so I think it really allows for us to have that opportunity to really self-evaluate a lot in what we're doing. And I think the relationship piece, a lot of it, everybody opens up at a different timeline and in a different way. And I think, especially to an assistant coach, they're going to open up super fast. The head coach sometimes might take a little longer. And I'm definitely somebody, when I took this job to get back into the head coaching side, after having been an assistant again for a couple of years, that was the big thing, is I wanted to still have that same relationship aspect that I had as an assistant. Finding different ways, whether it's going for coffee, having casual meetings in the office, but I even do a ton of it just on field with one-on-one interactions with the girls outside of practice, because a lot of them, they don't even realize that they're opening up in those settings because you're doing it within a drill. For a lot of the girls, that gets them into it really quickly, and then they're comfortable just coming in, popping into the office or joking around or sending you a goofy text message. And I think it's, as we get older, obviously the girls are staying the same age that you're coaching. So you've got to be, willing to adapt enough with the technology phase and what's going on in their lives without sacrificing that professionalism line that you always want to still keep. And maybe you're philosophical, but you do have to adapt a little bit to things that they're going through and stay up on it as well, because or else you won't get that relationship side with them.
If I'm hearing you right, there's an element of technology in terms of the way you communicate with your players, the way that you engage in the kinds of activities you just mentioned, and adapting while maintaining, right, the standards that you feel are appropriate for the team from a communications best practices perspective. And also could hear your answer as related to continuing to adapt and iterate on how technology is used to enhance a variety of different aspects of player performance, athletic performance, analyzing and utilizing data to help enhance the overall trajectory of the team. Can you talk more about both?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's something that's changed dramatically, especially like when I was a college athlete, we were still using VHS test tapes to scout our opponents and do those things, versus now, like we have two different film softwares that we utilize. We have cameras in all of our facilities that record all of our practices, and they're automatically uploaded to the girls and stuff. You can go another step with those, and that'll actually perform analytics for you if you really want to. But I think this generation, they're so eager to want to utilize those things. I think even when I was in college, we were okay just watching a little bit of game film, getting a paper scout, and or just even just going out and playing a team, versus now these girls, they really want to know everything. They want to know how they're performing at practice, but as well as for an opponent that they're going to go play, they want to have that information. In the best opportunity, you'll get some girls that will actually Google the player that they're matched up against defensively to learn about their life like that, to see if there's something that makes them tick. So I think technology has become such a big portion of it. And I think there's great ways to utilize it. And then I think there's also, you can go down that rabbit hole with it. You lose that person to person or that ability to just figure things out as well as they go and not need all that information up front. So it's finding that happy balance of what that team needs and what might be too much for them against a certain team, and then what things they don't need to know that detail. We might, as the staff, know that detail, but we're like, we don't need to share that with them. They'll figure that out as they go.
Certainly makes sense. Another facet I'd be curious to hear about, both from a technology and just how you tend to approach things as a coach and with your team and staff, is in the context of addressing injuries. So this is something that I reflect on often as someone with plantar fasciitis, and recently had a gait analysis and just trying to get a better sense of best practices and approaches out there. What are some approaches you tend to find particularly beneficial? What are some things that you may have learned are too much, to your last point? Would just love to hear your philosophy as well as your approach to managing athletic injury, both on the team and for yourself personally.
Yeah, I think with the team, obviously, we're fortunate at the collegiate level to always have access to athletic training staff, doctors, and those people who definitely know better than me on the immediate needs for those injuries. But we definitely utilize a lot of the technology standards, whether it's from a recovery standpoint of using Normatex and the Theraguns. In those things, we definitely utilize those on a regular basis. And then we still do a lot of the old school of cold tubs after heavy workouts, and obviously just basic ice very often takes care of a lot of it. Same thing, foam rolling is really big for us. Our strength department really is great about utilizing that in every single lift and the mobility side. So I think from that side, I think we do a nice job of balancing the use of technology where it does really make sense, because there are phases of recovery and phases of injury wise where the technology is just so advanced now that we can get kids back on the field so much sooner than we used to, or have the ability for them to play through a minor injury a lot easier, because we're able to actually build their strength, whether it's through stim or through ultrasound, actually help the injury and help the pain level go through. And I think from that aspect of things, I think utilizing the technology side is great. I think in terms of, for me, in personal injury wise, I tend to go actually very low technology on my stuff. I'm huge with foam rolling. Just foam rolling and bands are my best friends at this point of just keeping me mobile and keeping me loose and stuff. But when I was an athlete, my senior season, I had an injury that I was playing through my whole senior season and was very reliant on technology of stim and different things to get that pain management down to a level which I could practice and play every day. So I think from that aspect of things, it's a game changer for sure.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to hear your best practices, and certainly making mental notes. Foam rolling is the thing I have tried to bring back in recently after having gotten a bit out of the habit, and it is extremely effective and extremely excruciating. I'm glad to hear that it is your best friend, and I'm working toward that. So the conversation is quite inspiring for me personally as well. So you talked a little bit about putting into practice some of what you just mentioned, both for yourself and for developing talent. Would be curious if you could say more about your coaching philosophy, and essentially when you think about the nuances that you mentioned in terms of things changing every year and recognizing that you need to adapt and iterate on an individual player level, what remains consistent for you?
I think the biggest thing in my philosophy, and that's recruits ask this question all the time, and I mean, you can see it through the girls to a degree, but I think the biggest thing for me that stays consistent everywhere I go whether I'm an assistant or a head coach, regardless of the level, is the one-on-one and that individualized attention that each kid gets, and whether that is on field of individual workouts, and meetings and that aspect of things, to also off field of making sure that really, what each kid wants to get out of their experience at that institution with this lacrosse program, because that's the most important piece. So a lot of times through the recruiting process, even with kids, that's a lot of the conversations is like figuring out what drives them in life and in that aspect of things, to see, okay, is their personality going to fit into the culture of the group that we currently have, and to being willing to make those sacrifices that you have to be successful as a college athlete and stuff. So I think that individual aspect for me is always, and then the pieces that I think change with which each group is, I have a grouping of standards and philosophies that kind of carries with me in terms of trust and drive, and in those kind of key words that we build, but creating that player-led culture as much as possible. So allowing them to really take the ownership of the program that they're a part of as well, because as much as, as I'm overseeing it, they're the ones really putting in the sacrifice and the work on the field. So really just empowering them to be those leaders and make those sacrifices and really just drive and excel both on and off the field. So I think if you don't have the relationship side with the one-on-one, they're never going to trust you to be able to do that. And you're not going to get the most out of what that student athlete really wants here. And for some of them, it's being just at certain levels, it might just be being on a team and having that camaraderie with it. To now I'm at a program that our goal every year is to win conference championships and make those NCAA runs. So they have a little more loftier athletic goals, but their off-field goals are even loftier. And so we have 3 in med school currently, 1 going to med school next year, 1 going to law school next year. So they're not here just to coast through and go for that ride. So it makes it exciting to be able to go with it, but you've got to be able to have that attention to detail with the one-on-one to make sure that you're doing everything you can to help them get those goals.
Absolutely. You've mentioned the off-field goals for many players a few times, while recognizing that individual drive and commitment and charting their pathways is a key part of that. What are some things that you and your staff do to help support students in terms of the off-field side of things?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of academic support here as a department, but I think us as a staff, we do a great job of just making sure we're doing touch points with the girls on academically, or where they're at within their college process. Are they applying for internships? Are they a year away from that, but starting to think about maybe what types of things they can do this year, maybe in their sophomore year, to help get them those internships that they want? Or is it just as simple as writing recommendation letters for them for anything they need? I think they're always nervous to ask me, Coach, can you write a recommendation? I go, yeah, 100%. And I think we spend probably more time with them outside of their parents than anybody. So it's a pleasure to be able to help them in that next phase of their life and move from it. But it also allows us to have kind of that insight of, okay, what schools are at the top of your list, or what jobs are you really excited to be applying for? So it gives us another level of getting to know what their future plans and what's driving them right now to get there.
Sounds like you're coaching and mentoring, certainly in terms of their performance on the field and as part of the team, but also in terms of helping them to think comprehensively about their time at Central Michigan University and beyond, and building in checkpoints along the way to help support them in staying on track with those goals.
100%.
Wonderful. When it comes to other aspects of that journey, I'd be curious to hear if you're comfortable sharing anything in terms of how do you tend to approach the conversation if it seems like things aren't on track, if it seems like either an athlete is very focused on what's happening on field and perhaps not on track in the other goals that they've set for themselves off field, or the reverse. What are some of the approaches you use from a coaching and mentoring perspective?
Yeah, I think actually just had to have a hard conversation with a young student athlete who just is struggling with the transition. So both they're on field and they're off field, is not quite to the standard of what the program expects out of them. So I think the biggest piece is always not to act irrationally to them, and for them to think of it's like a punishment meeting that they're coming into, because you ultimately want to help them through it and get to maybe if there's a root cause of what's causing it, whether it's homesickness, whether it's just something maybe happened at home that caused them to have a couple bad weeks, both mentally or physically, or roommate troubles is super common thing, especially amongst girls. And so I think always approaching it that it's going to be a conversation first. And some meetings might just be a conversation and then being like, okay, this is something that we have a counselor here on campus who works directly with our student athletes. So a lot of times it's very often of, okay, let's have you get with our counselor to be able to dive into this deeper, because I'm realistic. I don't expect them to open up to me about every single aspect of it. A lot of times having that neutral party is so much easier, and then it just allows for them to just give me a check-in and a touch point of, yeah, but I'm going to my sessions. It's really helping. And if they want to open up more to me, great. But as long as I know they're getting that help of somebody who can really help them through the issue. If it's an academic issue, it's getting them with our academic services, and whether it's needing tutors or needing a mentor or those aspects of things. So being able to utilize our people who specialize in those areas, and then us as a staff being able to be the extra support for them. But I think the conversation aspect is huge, because so often sometimes it's something very small, and then sometimes you find out that something so much deeper is going on in this kid's life that maybe even like taking a step back from the team for a little bit is really what they ultimately need, because it's just the worst thing that a sport can do for somebody is be an added stressor. So if taking it out of the equation helps them thrive, then we can have that conversation later on of, okay, is this really what you want to be doing, or do you want to take that step away from the program? And then we've had kids that we've had to remove from the program as well, because we just didn't see them putting in that effort to make those changes and that aspect of things. And it's really hard because you love all the kids, but ultimately when you've got 2 now with it and 35 with it, you got to think of the 35 longer term.
It sounds like a tough process, but one that you approach mindfully and over time, and utilizing the checkpoint approach that you had mentioned before. Yeah. I would love to talk about the role of nutrition in all of this from a team perspective, from an individual perspective, and from a personal perspective. Would love to hear your thoughts on the role of nutrition, but also practical strategies that you use.
Yeah, I mean, nutrition's everything. And I think that has evolved so much, and schools are also putting so much more thought behind it and even financial backing behind the nutrition side, because it's becoming such a game changer. And this generation just really is very aware of all of it, and they're very aware of what they put in their body, what it does to their body. And so we have to be aware of it as coaches, while also realizing we have to stay within budgets and those things. So that's where I think the toughest piece comes in, is being able to still provide them with nutrition on the fly. Here we have a nutrition bar in our weight room that each year they are continuing to build up and advance until we can get to a full nutrition center model that some of the Power 5 schools have gone to. And then we have another one in our locker room as well. It allows for the girls to be able to get an applesauce or a Cliff Bar, those types of things, either right before practice, right after practice, before they go to a lift, to make sure that they're refueling their body in that aspect of it. And then obviously thinking about when we're traveling, the pregame meal is definitely the most important. And then if we're playing a Friday, Sunday game, the post-game meal on that Friday is also super vital to make sure that it's sustainable and helping their recovery going into Saturday. And then obviously getting ready to play again on Sunday, I think. And you just get creative with it and learning, okay, these are the types of things that we can really do on a budget and do inexpensively for the teams. And then these are the things that we are going to spend the money on. Whether it's we use Honey Stinger, like recovery in game a lot. We'll have the chews on the sidelines and those types of things. And we're going to spend a little more on that aspect of it, because the in-game recovery is so important and stuff. Even if they warm up for 30 minutes and then they've got to play 60. So giving them something after warm-ups that they can get ready for that first quarter is huge. So we think a lot about it. I think we utilize our strength staff with that a lot in getting their opinions of it. I think the big thing with female athletes, it's not necessarily getting into the calories that they need to eat on a daily basis and that type of thing with a football player who's needing to gain, or a wrestler, they're used to hearing that so often. But with females, you want to not do that as much. It's just making them understand of what types of things they should be eating to make sure they're getting enough in their body on a daily basis. So if it happens to be an athlete who is gluten-free, making sure that they're still getting those carbs in another way in that aspect of things too. And same thing, having girls who are vegetarian or vegan, making sure that they're getting the protein. And I think that's the hardest part of pro athletes, or they all can do kind of those fad diets and even go more plant-based because they do have a little more of the free income or the ability to maybe have a chef. I think for college athletes, I've had a couple players try to either go the plant-based or go meatless, and it can be really hard to find enough nutrients through the foods they're eating. So a lot of it has to be supplement based. And for some kids that's feasible, and for other kids it's just not. So it's having those conversations with those girls of not deterring them from doing any of it, but just making sure that they are getting the right resources, or meeting with our nutrition department and across campus on the academic side, and kind of getting a personalized plan to make sure that they're getting what they need to fuel their bodies.
There's so much to what you just said. I want to make sure I unpack as much of it as we can. First of all, I just want to acknowledge I'm a vegan and plant-based foods advocate. So we'd love to talk about that from a few different lenses, and have heard you mention Game Changers, which naturally brings up the Game Changers movie for me on Netflix. And so I do want to talk a little bit about athletes that we see advocating plant-based and vegan diets, and how you think about role models and learning from others and testing and iterating based on the athletic community examples as well. To start out, in terms of exactly what you just mentioned, if I'm hearing you correctly, number one, there are aspects to supporting athlete nutrition that are at least partially within your control when it comes to the food bar that's available, when it comes to game travel, when it comes to certain meals. And much of that is up to the players to manage for themselves off the field. And when it comes to that element of managing it themselves, cost is a factor, as is essentially where they're getting their meals, right? And from both of those perspectives, it sounds like the nutrient management, including supplements, is something that you're working with those who are opting into vegetarianism or veganism on their own. Can you say more about the part that is within your purview and how plant-based and vegan foods play a role in that?
Yeah, I think we always make sure, just within obviously our athletes who are choosing that form, or I've had athletes who are celiac, and so it's treating it the exact same in terms of we're not going to force them into not doing it based on what we're feeding the team. So it's making sure that everywhere we're going, or anything that we're providing through us, is substantial, and it's having a substantial option for the smaller group who might be just choosing a different path and how they're creating those nutrients. So it's making sure, oh, our vegetarian, yep, your option's always just a salad. No, because you're not going to perform. So making sure places that we're going, that they either have a tofu option or a substantial pasta option for them. And I think it's become a lot easier, actually. So I would say when I first started planning meals for teams, when you had a kid who had a food allergy, or when gluten-free was just starting to pop up, it was really hard. There were maybe kind of two places that you go within your budget realm and get something substantial for them, versus now nearly every place that you go, from even a Noodles and Co. to obviously pizza places, they've all made it substantially easier now to create a good environment for them and keep allowing them to eat how they want to eat and still be successful, and suffer in some cases eat how they need to eat because of actual dietary restriction on that front. So I think from that standpoint of things, it's allowed us to get a lot more creative and be able to offer a lot more of those opportunities. And then the other aspect is just education for the student athletes, of if they're choosing to do that, making sure that they're getting with our athletic training staff, our strength staff, to make sure any of the supplements that they do need to put in their bodies, that it's also verified, that it's legal in the NCAA in that aspect. And I think that's the biggest piece, is just making sure what they're putting in their body is not actually going to take them off the field when they get drug tested. I think the education side is huge on our end of things, and just making sure that they're doing it for the right reasons. Versus, I know when Game Changers came out, I was at Marquette and two girls walked in, they're like, we're gonna go plant-based. We're like, why? They were like, well, we watched this documentary. We're like, that's great, but let's have you sit down actually with the staff and figure out, are you actually gonna buy into this and do it? Or is this just a fad? Because for you to change your whole diet for a fad as a Division I athlete doesn't make sense. So that's a lot of it as well.
Totally makes sense. It goes back to the coaching and mentoring and one-on-one conversations that you mentioned previously. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I would be curious from your own perspective, when you think about influencers in the athletic community, whether specific to lacrosse or more broadly, what are some things that you pay attention to, or how do you tend to think about testing and iterating strategies for yourself, nutrition and beyond, based on the voices that you tap into and the insights that you hear from the athletic community?
Yeah, I think for me, I try to test out different things, because obviously you get into your 30s and you're like, okay, my body is starting to feel a little older, whether it's doing athletic greens or like the superfood greens, those types of things. I've gotten into the collagen powder actually this year. But I think a lot of it is talking to strength staffs and resources like that, and just picking their brain of, oh, okay, I saw this pop up. Do you think this is something that could be beneficial for someone like me that sometimes has a good amount of time that I can be on a good workout regimen? Sometimes like my workouts are, because I'm on my feet, I'm shooting on the goalies in practice. And will these things just help my body ultimately feel good? I think that's always a big piece for me. I spend so much either in a car or on a bus, flying on planes, that those things that keep my body feeling like loose and light. So that's even my workouts have adapted completely, especially over the last probably 6 years, to being more of just non-impact and more bike workouts or just flexibility workouts and that type of thing. For me, I spent my days building my muscle and doing that aspect of things. Of now it's just keeping my body healthy and able to be active and up and keep up with the girls in that sense of it.
Totally makes sense. What about the other benefits you get from working out and the other benefits you get from your routine? I'd be curious. Like for me, running is as much, if not more, mental health as it is physical health. And if it's too late in the day or not happening, it's a major thing I have to manage. What are some of the other benefits you get from working out, and how have you managed that in light of the transition you mentioned over the past few years in terms of switching to less impact and other moves that help maintain and optimize the physical health side?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely somebody, if I don't do it in the morning, I'm probably not going to do it. It's just because I'm on my feet all day. So like the odds of me then being like at 6 o'clock, being like, oh yeah, I'm going to go work out, and it's probably not going to happen. So I'm realistic with it. So I think the mental health side obviously is always something, but for me, I think even it's the more non-traditional that help my mental health. So going for long walks, or I figured out this summer that water for me is actually a huge piece. Going for walks, worked on so many of the Great Lakes and have those here. Obviously in Mount Pleasant, we don't have that. We do have the Chippewa River, at least going for walks along that. That for me is more the mental health side of the workouts. And that's where I found, that's where music came in for me. When I was working up in obviously really long winters, it's really cold, a little less outdoor time in that aspect of things, and really needed something to help clear my head that was non-athletic based, because so much of my day-to-day in my life is the compete in athleticism. I was like, oh, I need something that's just totally different, that I can, if I have a bad day, I can spend 10 minutes and clear my head. So I started teaching myself guitar when I was up there, and then it's become a huge thing, and we can dive into everything with my dad and that aspect of things. And after that was ultimately why music came back in. When I was younger, music was always big, and then actually through high school was probably when it went quiet. Nobody really knew about it, and then brought it back, and it's been great. And I think it's For me, it's still the mental health, but it gives me another thing to connect with the girls on. They see a different side of me with that aspect of things too. So it's brought a lot of unexpected things. But ultimately for me, that was when I first was doing it, it was literally just, it was an escape that workouts at that point weren't giving me.
I'm so inspired by the article I read about you performing with your dad. So I'd love to jump in there. Can you say more about how you have not only brought performing together as a family, but also the advocacy related elements that tie in with that as well?
Yeah, so I think the music side has really evolved over the last, it's probably 5 years now. So my dad, as his retirement, is now a actual full-time touring musician. So he always was a songwriter and would perform when we were younger, like he would play at some coffee houses, but his actual job in advertising just didn't afford him a lot of time to do it long term. And he retired, and that's been his thing. So he's put out 5 albums and an EP in that time frame, 3 actually in the last 2 years and stuff. So it kind of, that's where it triggered to me of, oh, maybe music. That was when he was just starting to get into like his performing. He would actually come up to the UP and he'd play at a couple of the restaurants up there. So it gave us another bond as well. We always had hockey and other sports. So just evolved from there. And then his songwriting style is very much folk Americana and has a lot of push for social rights in it and things that are going on, obviously, in the world. What's allowed, especially him, but also for me to get involved in some of the advocacy side, whether it's for United Cerebral Palsy or he wrote a song a few years back about the homeless community in Michigan. Actually, they used funds for one of the shows to go towards the shelters. So just being able to tap into that as well with them. So it's always been a huge piece for both him and my mom of being involved in the community side of it and speaking our mind and the advocacy piece. So he does it obviously so much through his music, and I've been able to sing on the last 2 albums. So I'm on, I think, 7 songs between the 2 albums, allowed me to get engaged in it in that sense as well, which has been a lot of fun.
That's amazing. It sounds like you had the opportunity to join in these shared performances and these shared areas of focus from an advocacy and a giving back and a service perspective. And you also find a lot of meaning, it sounds, and also an opportunity to connect with your team through your own personal music journey. How do you make time during the week? You mentioned prioritizing time for the workouts is its own optimization exercise, right? How do you protect the time for personal health and for music?
Yeah, I think there's times I'm very good at that and times that I'm horrible at taking time for me. And I think it's for this year especially. So I've been without an assistant coach. So we're hoping to actually get one here in the next couple of weeks. So it's put a lot on my plate, but the big thing for me was making sure that I'm useless if I'm run too thin. So it's understanding of, okay, I function really well in the morning. I give myself, okay, from 7 to 4, I'm going to be really on. And then the days that I don't need to do anything after 4 o'clock, I don't. And so it does give me that time then to maybe rehearse a little bit on those days, even if it's for 15 minutes before cooking dinner and doing that stuff, or if it's watching a stupid TV show or trying to really give myself that reprieve, knowing that once games start and film aspect starts, there's going to be some days where I can't give myself outside of making sure I go to bed at a proper hour to get the right time amount of sleep to be ready to be recovered for the next day has been huge. So I think that's been something through my coaching career that's always been something I've battled with, is that work-life balance. And I go through phases where I'm good with it, and I go through phases where I'm really bad. And I think doing so many Upstart programs, I was so bad with it. I was always was attached to my phone, had to respond to every email, every text message from a kid, anything like that, versus now I will put it away and be like, okay, I can respond to that tomorrow a little better and in that aspect of things. Because otherwise it can just, I think people don't realize until they're in the coaching realm of everything that goes into it. And people always ask my parents, oh, what does Amelia do in the off season? They're like, what off season? They're like, day season, and she hits the road and she goes recruiting. And so it's even finding times on those types of things. Of I love food. And people would definitely say I'm a foodie. Love cooking for myself and going to great restaurants. So even when I'm not recruiting, sometimes I'll just be like, okay, I'm finding the best place in town and I'm going and treating myself to a great dinner tonight. And that's then my break from it for the day.
Definitely makes sense. For our listeners, when you say upstart program, can you say more in terms of what makes that have these added layers that I hear you speaking to when it comes to both the need of communication and, as you mentioned, the need to prioritize self-care and the life side of work and life and be able to put the phone to the side, which I also struggle with, and absolutely what you're saying absolutely resonates with me.
Yeah, and I think every program, whether it's a startup that I'll talk about or a little more established of where I'm at now, they all are 365, 24-hour a day, what's on your mind jobs. But I spent the first by 10, 11 years of my coaching career at upstart programs. So building those programs from scratch. So with those, your first year always on campus with those is you don't even have a team yet. So your job is to build an entire lacrosse team, build a budget, build a schedule, and do all of those things, as well as in some of the communities I was in, also expose people to lacrosse for the first time. So you're doing media appearances or social appearances or making sure you're out around town as much as possible to promote your program and yourself even as a head coach. So it's just a little more kind of all-encompassing when you're in those opportunities. And then obviously once the team's on campus, they're going to be very young in it. So the level of teaching and mentoring them through the college process, because you don't necessarily have those juniors and seniors who have taken those classes and can tell them what professors to take and take on some of that mentorship role. It's on you guys as a staff for those first 2 years usually. So I think they were unbelievable opportunities. And I think it's given me such a different look at college athletics than maybe had I gotten a job at a great Division I school right out of the gate. It makes me appreciate where I'm at now. And even Marquette, Michigan to here, like made me appreciate those opportunities. Oh, these kids know what they're doing. Oh yeah, I can just tell that senior, can you help them through this? And that aspect of things doesn't mean spend any less time thinking about the program. It's just now it's far more of, I can think a little more on the present versus when you're in an upstart, you're constantly thinking about the future of it because you have to, if your first 2 classes, if you're not smart with the type of student you bring in, your culture really is never going to go anywhere. So that's been the big focus here is being far more present. It's so easy in college coaching to always look to the next because you're like, we're recruiting in 2026s now. So juniors in high school, so they won't even step foot on campus for 3 more years. And so it's so easy to look ahead so much. But my big thing is trying to stay as present with this group because they're so special and we can do a lot. We have a chance to really to become a 3-time conference champion this year. And so if I'm not present, we could just pass us by and that opportunity could get wasted.
I really appreciate your point about you have to be prioritizing yourself and that if you're not, nothing else happens. It all starts with you. So it's a good reminder and certainly really appreciate hearing about how you have navigated some of those trade-offs and transitions over time and how you bring that to your coaching and guiding others. You've covered a variety of different aspects of your coaching and athletic journey. Any other insights you'd like to share or any other topics you'd like to bring in that we haven't yet touched upon?
Yeah, I think that the big piece I've always found now of with the coaching realm is I think so many people think it's like such a different experience and it is, but it's so much of what people who are in leadership roles in their jobs, whether it's that they're a leader of a couple of employees or they're a CEO and running an entire company or they're head of a family. It's the exact same type of day-to-day in terms of you never know what you might get the next day, but also just gives you that opportunity to think bigger than yourself. And I think it's being able to understand that we might do it a little differently on the coaching side just because we really never stop. But it translates so much to day life and to other opportunities. I have a lot of friends who've decided to get out of the coaching side in the last 5 years and seeing what they've decided to do with the skill sets they picked up as a college coach, or why the company hired them with no experience in what they were doing. They're like, you actually did this on a daily basis. It was just in a different setting. So I think feeling like you can adapt and go into any setting, because any job that you've had, or whether you've been a stay-at-home parent for your whole life, you've managed people and you've managed situations, taking those opportunities and experiences in anything you do.
Absolutely. Certainly applies, as we talked about from the beginning, whether we're thinking about parenting, managing, leading. So many elements of what you have talked about extend to include and go beyond the athletic sphere. So I really appreciate all the insights you've shared. For those that would like to learn more about you and your work and your team, where can they go?
Yeah, so you can follow the team. We are all over social media. So we're at CMU Lacrosse is where you can find everything. And then you can find our schedule and all the information on our day-to-day at cmuathletics.com.
Thank you so much, Emilia. I am grateful for the time we shared on the Mercy Athletic and Lacrosse field, and very grateful for you taking the time to share your insights today. It's been a really inspiring conversation, and hopefully our listeners will continue to follow and learn more. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.